I hadn't stepped foot inside Grandmother Lorraine's house since the funeral. Not because I couldn't bear it, but because I couldn't stomach what it had become. Once filled with the scent of lemon polish and her soft humming from the parlor, now it stood like a gutted shell with new ghosts. Ghosts with names I used to love. I pushed open the front door without knocking, like I always used to. Except this time, no one called my name from the sitting room. No warm embrace. No plate of almond cookies waiting by the window. Just Miles, standing like some conquering prince in front of the fireplace, spinning a diamond ring around his finger. "David," he said with mock surprise, that smirk crawling across his face like a stain. "Didn't think you had the guts to show." I didn't respond right away. I just took in the scene, the way he stood directly under Grandmother's portrait like he belonged there. Like he hadn't been absent for years while I ran errands, fixed leaky pipes, and sat beside her bed when she coughed through the night. And next to him, on the mantel, was the small lacquered box she used to keep locked. I knew what was inside. The rings. Her wedding set. Promised to me since I was a teenager. Not because I was better, but because I was there. Because I cared. "You're so pathetic," he said with a laugh, flicking the lid open and pulling the rings into view like a magician with a rabbit. "Really? You think being the golden grandson gets you anything? It doesn't. Sentiment doesn't sign checks. Loyalty doesn't buy beachfront property." I looked at him, the blood in my ears humming. "And betrayal? That buys you what exactly? A new wardrobe and a hollow marriage." He didn't flinch. He was too far gone for shame. "Rachel and I are getting married," he said, tossing one of the rings in the air and catching it with a smug flick of the wrist. "And she helped me get everything. The house, the money, the jewelry. You're left with nothing." I took a slow breath. Measured. Intentional. There was no heat in my chest anymore. No ache. Just focus. I walked further into the room, letting the door swing shut behind me. The lock clicked like punctuation. Miles looked confused for a moment. Like he expected me to yell. To break. But I didn't give him that satisfaction. "Actually," I said, sliding my hands into my coat pockets, "there's something you both should know." His eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" I smiled. Calmly. Quietly. The way Grandmother used to when she knew something you didn't. "You think you've won," I said, keeping my voice level. "You think getting Rachel to flip on me, spinning lies in court, slithering your way through family dinners with that smug little grin made you king of the ashes you left behind. But you didn't win, Miles. You played yourself. You and Rachel both." He scoffed. "You're delusional. You lost everything. The judge saw through your little pity act. You're broke. Alone. And out of your mind if you think anyone believes your version." I moved to the old armchair near the fireplace, the one Grandmother used to read in, and sat down without asking. His jaw twitched. That chair still held weight, still whispered of legacy. And I knew he felt it, even if he couldn't name it. "You ever wonder why Grandmother never changed her will in the last few years?" I asked. He looked uneasy for the first time. "Because she was too old to bother." "Wrong," I said. "Because she knew what was coming. She saw through you. Through Rachel. She didn't want a war while she was alive, so she played the part. Let you think you were winning. And the best part? You believed it." He crossed his arms. "You don't have proof." That made me laugh, just a little. "That's the thing about people like you, Miles. You think truth is something you can auction off. Twist. Repackage. But truth? It's patient. It waits. It gathers receipts." His face shifted then. Not fear, exactly. But doubt. The kind that starts in the stomach and works its way up like rot. "I don't need to prove anything to you tonight," I said, rising from the chair. "I just needed to see your face when you realized the story wasn't over, that what you stole was the bait, and that the real legacy, the one you thought you buried with your lies, it's about to bury you instead." I walked toward the door, each step slow, deliberate. My hand on the knob, I turned back once more. "Tell Rachel I hope the ring fits. It won't mean much where you're both headed, but it's the only thing you'll be able to say you truly held, if only for a little while." Miles stood frozen, still clutching the diamonds like they meant something, like they could protect him from what was coming. I stepped into the dusk, the cool air slicing clean across my skin. Somewhere behind me, the fire crackled like laughter. But it wasn't Miles laughing anymore. It was me. I didn't open the journal until last week. It sat untouched on my bookshelf, tucked between a worn copy of East of Eden and a photo frame I hadn't had the heart to dust off since the divorce. For months, I couldn't bring myself to even glance at that velvet pouch. It was the last thing grandmother ever gave me, handed to me with a trembling smile and a whisper I haven't stopped hearing since. Don't fight them now. Let them believe they've won. Then, when the moment's right, use this. I didn't understand it then. Or maybe I refused to. Because some part of me, the part that still remembered Rachel's laugh at midnight and my brother's arm slung lazily around my shoulders after family barbecues, didn't want to believe it could be true. Betrayal is louder when it comes from the people you swore would never raise their voice against you. But last week, I finally opened the pouch. The velvet was still soft, untouched by time or treachery. Inside was a signet ring I recognized from my childhood. Lorraine's family crest, etched in gold and green enamel. Below it, wrapped in aged tissue, was the small leather journal. No label, no instructions, just hers. The first page was simple. If you're reading this, then the lies have already spread. I turned the next page with a hand that didn't feel like mine. She had written everything. Dates, amounts, account numbers. Descriptions of whispered conversations she'd overheard when she pretended to nap in her sunroom. Real estate transfers she intercepted. Property documents that mysteriously never reached the courthouse. Even offshore accounts, hidden beneath shell corporations so carefully crafted, no one would have found them unless they knew exactly where to look. And she had known. In her elegant cursive, grandmother spelled out what I'd spent months trying to explain to deaf ears. Rachael hadn't just cheated on me. She had orchestrated my downfall. And Miles? He hadn't just betrayed me out of impulse or lust. He had calculated it, studied the parts of me that trusted him, and pulled them apart like a safecracker with a blueprint. But Lorraine? She didn't just suspect. She prepared. There was a spreadsheet tucked in the back sleeve of the journal, handwritten in pencil, corrected in ink. On it, she'd drawn a web connecting every asset she owned, every trust she'd formed, every contingency plan. And at the center of it all, circled twice in red, was my name. I sat in the quiet of my apartment, pages spread out around me like a map of vindication, and I wept, not because I was sad, not because I felt triumphant, but because someone had believed me. All this time, in a family that had learned to nod when Miles talked and smile when Rachael charmed a room, Lorraine had seen through it all. I remembered that last afternoon with her so clearly now. It was just 2 weeks before she passed, the kind of day where even the sunlight feels heavy. I brought her lavender tea and sat beside her while she folded laundry slowly, deliberately. She had slipped the pouch into my hands with a look that didn't need explaining. They'll come for everything, she said, eyes half-lidded with the weight of knowing. And they'll do it with silk gloves and crocodile tears. But you, David, you don't fight like they do. You wait. And then you break them with truth. I thought she was being dramatic. I had no idea how right she was. The journal didn't just reveal what they'd done. It made it clear they hadn't even reached the core of her wealth. They'd stolen the house she let them see, the accounts she left open, the jewelry she mentioned at brunches with subtle flair. But the real assets, the estate in Province, the stocks in 2 anonymous tech startups, the heirlooms kept in storage under an alias. Those were never touched, because they didn't know they existed. I stared at the ledger, my name underlined beside legal access codes and phrases like irrevocable trust, C Clause 4C. The weight of it hit me like the tide. I hadn't lost. I had only been given the chance to watch them fall deeper into their own trap. There was a time, not long ago, when I would have confronted them immediately, shouted the truth across dinner tables, slammed evidence on the floor during some performative reckoning. But Lorraine's voice lingered. Let them believe they've won. And that was the key. They weren't expecting me to be quiet. They mistook silence for surrender. They thought absence meant defeat. But the truth was, I had been watching, waiting, gathering everything I needed. That night, I sat alone on the balcony of my apartment, the journal open beside me, and I finally allowed myself to feel something I hadn't in months. Clarity. This wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about restoration. It was about letting truth walk back into the room like it never left, dressed in velvet and sealed in a pouch passed down by a woman everyone had underestimated. They all thought Grandmother Lorraine was just a sweet old matriarch with pearls and recipes. But she'd been a lioness wrapped in lace. She didn't just leave me a fortune. She left me a path and a warning. Now, with the journal in my hands and the ledger in my safe, I knew the next step wasn't to destroy them. It was to let them keep digging, just a little more. Because the further they reached, the more devastating the fall. They hadn't stolen everything. They'd only stolen the part she wanted them to see. And now? It was time they saw what she'd really left behind. It was the word she used most often behind closed doors: pathetic. I remember the first time Rachel said it when she didn't know I was listening. She had Miles on speakerphone. I was in the hallway, barefoot, carrying a tray of tea I'd made for her because she'd said she had a migraine. David thinks showing up with flowers makes up for being boring. He's sweet, but he's just pathetic. That word had echoed in my chest louder than I'd ever admit. It wasn't anger I felt then. It was the slow, quiet crumbling of something I couldn't name. A realization. A tearing seam. And I still brought her the tea, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. That was long before the trial. Before the subpoenas. Before my own brother sat on the other side of the courtroom, testifying against me with the same ease he used when he used to tell my birthday jokes at family barbecues. They didn't just try to take things from me. They rewrote my story. My name, once tethered to integrity and patience, became a footnote in their carefully scripted narrative of failure and dysfunction. Rachel filed for divorce 2 weeks after grandmother Lorraine's funeral. She said she needed space. Said we'd grown apart. Said I was emotionally unavailable. What she meant was, she had already moved on. With Miles, my brother. The day I received the summons, I found a note folded into the lining of her jewelry box. "It's cleaner this way," it read. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "You deserve better." Just clinical detachment. Rachel always had a way of making cruelty sound rational. When the court hearings began, it was like walking into a play where everyone had been handed a script but me. They accused me of financial irresponsibility, of mood swings, of paranoia. Miles claimed I had withdrawn large sums of money and used them for unstable investments. Rachel cried on the stand. She wore the blue dress I bought her on our 4th anniversary. She dabbed the corner of her eye with a silk handkerchief, describing how she feared for her future if I retained any control of the estate. The judge nodded solemnly. The room fell for it. All of it. I tried to speak. Tried to explain that the withdrawals were for grandmother's private care. That I kept the receipts. That the so-called instability was the result of a panic attack after I discovered their affair. But none of it mattered. Truth didn't fit the story they had sold. The courtroom didn't want facts. It wanted closure. And Miles and Rachel wrapped it in a bow of respectable lies. They won everything. The townhouse on Beecham Street. The art collection Lorraine left behind. Even the Mercedes I'd restored with my father over a summer 10 years ago. Gone. All of it. The judge said the division was equitable. Equitable. I walked out of that courtroom a shell of myself, holding a folder of documents that boiled my life down to numbers, mischaracterizations, and signatures. The world didn't clap or mourn. It just moved on. The family didn't speak much after that. Some of them sent polite texts. "Hope you're taking care of yourself. Sorry things got messy." My Aunt Judith called once, said she was staying neutral, like I had asked her to pick sides in a chess game instead of just acknowledge that I'd been gutted in front of everyone. No one wanted to believe Rachel had been unfaithful. She was too polished, too perfect. Always knew the right thing to say at baby showers and funerals. She made lemon squares for the neighbors, smiled at children, never raised her voice. Her betrayal didn't look how they thought betrayal should look. And Miles? He had that charming older brother glint in his eye. The one that used to talk me out of trouble when we were kids. The one that now smirked while he signed declarations condemning my character. They all said the same thing in hushed corners. It's just sad. David never really lived up to his potential. But I had. Just not in ways they could see. I lived it in the quiet care I gave Lorraine during her final years. In the nights I stayed up learning probate law just to understand her will. In the way I packed up her belongings after she died, each scarf, each teacup, each photo handled like a relic. I lived it in the loyalty I gave to a marriage that didn't deserve it. In the blind trust one extended to a brother who sharpened his knives behind my back. But no one asked about that, because they already believed the story Miles and Rachel fed them. That I was broken, that I was bitter, that I was, in every way that mattered, pathetic. They didn't know what I knew now. They didn't know about the offshore accounts, the forged documents. They didn't know Rachel had falsified invoices to siphon funds from Lorraine's estate, or that Miles had filed property transfers in my name while I was out of the country. They didn't know, but Lorraine did. And now, so did I. She saw through them long before I ever did. She hadn't just suspected, she had documented everything. And when she pressed the velvet pouch into my hand, she wasn't giving me revenge. She was giving me clarity. So I stayed silent. Let them write their story. Let them celebrate in the house they stole and toast with wine bought from funds they laundered through legal trickery. I let them live in their version of truth, because I knew the day was coming when the real one would arrive, uninvited, undeniable, and impossible to escape. And on that day, the word pathetic would find a new home. Not with me. With them. The invitation came in a white envelope with a gold seal, like something out of a wedding catalog or an awards gala. Inside, a note written in Rachel's elegant cursive. We'd love to have you at our celebration dinner, an intimate gathering before the big day. Family only. 7 p.m. Formal attire. Beneath her perfect penmanship was a smiley face, as if that erased the venom behind it. I stared at it for a while, letting the irony soak in. My brother and my ex-wife were throwing a party for their engagement, and they wanted me, the man they gutted, to sit at the table like it was all a warm reunion. I went, not because I had any desire to break bread with the two of them, but because I needed them to see something. Not just me. The version of me that had been forged in silence, steadied in betrayal, and sharpened by the truth Lorraine left behind. I wasn't going for revenge. I was going for clarity, and I wanted an audience. The dinner was held at the Crestmore estate, my grandmother's summer home, the one Miles had swindled through technicalities and probate court. Once, I'd helped paint the banisters in that house when I was 19. I knew which stair creaked before it was stepped on, which guest room had the stuck window. Now it was lit up like a magazine spread. White tablecloths, a catered three-course meal, and Miles' smug voice booming from the dining room like he was some benevolent king inviting the peasants to dine. When I arrived, I was shown to a seat at the far end of the long dining table, near the doors leading out to the veranda. Strategic, distant, symbolic. But I didn't protest. I sat quietly, adjusted my cufflinks, and scanned the room. Aunt Judith was there, already half a glass into her wine. Uncle Terence made awkward eye contact, then looked down at his plate. My cousin Margot smiled faintly at me, then whispered something to her husband. They were all here, members of a family that had grown too quiet around me, too cautious since the trial, as if my presence required tiptoeing. Then Rachel walked in, radiant in emerald green, her hair pulled back in the same style she wore the night of our engagement party. She laughed loudly, dramatically, like she was starring in a play. Miles followed behind her, grinning, guiding her by the small of her back like he'd choreographed it. They sat at the head of the table, naturally. He tapped his glass with a spoon and stood up, the room quieting on cue. "Thank you all for coming," he said, voice syrupy and rehearsed. "This dinner means the world to us. Tomorrow, we celebrate publicly. But tonight? Tonight is just for family. For those who've supported us, stood by us, and tolerated us," Rachel added with a faux shy laugh. Miles smiled down at her, then raised his glass higher. "To my bride," he said, "and to our future, built from the ashes of David's past." Aunt Judith gasped. A few others chuckled nervously, unsure if it was a joke or a jab. It was both. Rachel didn't flinch. She was used to Miles' theatrics, used to weaponizing my name like it was some seasoning in their twisted feast. I didn't stand. I didn't yell. I didn't reach for a knife and ruin the place setting. I simply smiled. Calm. Controlled. Grandmother's signet ring cold against my skin under the cuff of my sleeve. "Funny you mention ashes," I said, just loud enough for the whole table to hear. "That's exactly what your prenup's about to turn into." The silence was instant. Miles blinked. Rachel's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. I leaned forward just slightly, locking eyes with both of them. "You should really read the fine print before you throw a party in someone else's house." Miles chuckled uneasily. "Still clinging to those fantasies, huh, David?" "Not fantasies," I said. "Facts." I stood slowly, letting my chair slide back with a deliberate scrape. "You see, Lorraine never included either of you in the actual estate. The house? The one you're pretending to own? It's tied up in a private irrevocable trust. And guess who holds the only signatory power on it?" Miles opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "And the jewelry Rachel's been flashing? The rings? Traceable heirlooms, never officially transferred. The financial records? Fraudulent withdrawals tied to Lorraine's accounts, documented by the bank and the estate lawyer." I stepped around the table now, letting my presence be felt, letting every word ring out clearly. "You didn't steal from someone clueless. You stole from someone who was waiting, someone who kept receipts, Someone who knew your playbook before you even picked the pieces. Rachel shifted in her seat, her smile finally cracking at the corners. I didn't come tonight to make a scene, I said. I came to offer you both a choice. Walk away. Or wait for tomorrow, when the bank notifies you that the accounts are frozen, the rings are recalled, and the house is placed under investigation for fraudulent occupation. Margot's husband coughed, covering his mouth like he was hiding a laugh. Judith looked between us like she was watching a car crash in real time. Miles tried to stand, but I raised a hand. Don't. Just sit with it. Sit with everything you thought you'd won. Every gloating smile. Every smug toast. This is the moment where the floor starts to crack. I walked to the doorway, paused with one hand on the frame. Enjoy the risotto, I added without turning. It's probably the last decent meal you'll have in this house. Then I stepped outside, letting the cool air wash over me like a baptism. Behind me, the room buzzed with murmurs, panic disguised as confusion. But I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Let the truth do what it always does. Burn quietly, and then all at once. I parked 3 blocks away from the office on purpose. I needed the walk. The air was sharp and dry, and the weight of what I was about to do settled over me like a second coat. I passed familiar brownstones and faceless commuters, each step more focused than the last. Mr. Alden's office sat on the top floor of an old brick building, just like it had for 40 years, unchanged, unbothered by the parade of new firms that rose and fell around it. I stepped into the quiet lobby, the receptionist nodding at me as if she'd been expecting me. Maybe she had. Mr. Alden was like that, always 10 steps ahead, always precise. He once told me he kept analog backups of everything because the cloud was just a polite word for a stranger's computer. He was already standing when I entered his office, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. His suit was as crisp as ever, navy with a muted silver tie, and the scent of cedar and old paper filled the air. His office hadn't changed since I was a child sitting on the leather bench while Lorraine signed paperwork that somehow always ended with a lollipop for me. David, he said warmly, extending his hand. It's time, isn't it? I nodded, feeling the gravity in those words. They think they own everything, I said as I sat down. The house, the jewelry, even my name. And they're wrong, he replied, pulling open a drawer and removing a slim leather folder. Lorraine never included them in her final estate. She knew they'd come sniffing around the obvious. That's why she created a parallel track, one that bypassed the public probate process entirely. He placed the folder in front of me. This, he said, is the real will, dated 6 months after the version they contested. Verified by 2 witnesses, notarized, and sealed in a fireproof vault at my discretion. My hand shook slightly as I opened it. There it was. Lorraine's signature, unmistakable. Her handwriting still elegant, deliberate. The words were direct, without frill or ambiguity. Everything, her properties, her accounts, her art collection, her shares in 2 international holding companies, had been transferred into a private irrevocable trust. And I was the sole trustee. You're telling me none of what they claimed is legally theirs? I asked, needing to hear it again. Mr. Alden nodded. The previous will was a placeholder. Lorraine expected exactly what happened. The lies, the manipulation. That's why this version was created. To safeguard her legacy. And yours. I leaned back, trying to absorb it. All the nights I'd spent staring at my ceiling, wondering if she'd believe their lies, wondering if she died thinking I'd failed her. Every bit of it dissolved with that single folder. They used the court system like a weapon, I said quietly. They painted me as unstable, unworthy. And yet here you are, he said, steepling his fingers. With the only version of events that matters. The one backed by truth. We spent the next hour reviewing the documents, one by one. The trust had layers, clauses, protections, detailed records of everything Miles and Rachel had tried to siphon. Lorraine had left nothing to chance. She had annotated statements, drawn lines to potential fraud, and even included a note for Mr. Alden. If they try to drown David in court, pull the rope. She left them the illusion, I said, flipping through pages, so they'd walk right into their own trap. Exactly, Mr. Alden said. And now they've not only revealed their intentions, they've committed fraud in the process. He reached into a separate drawer and handed me another envelope. These are recordings. Conversations Lorraine had with Rachel. She suspected the affair. She never confronted her directly, but she kept notes. Tapes. Emails. enough to show a pattern of manipulation and financial coercion. I opened the envelope slowly. There were 5 USB drives inside, each labeled with a date. One of them, August 14th, was the week after Lorraine had visited the beach house. That's when she first told me not to trust smiles without eyes behind them. What now? I asked. I mean, what do I do with all of this? That depends on your goal, Mr. Alden said. You can file quietly, reclaim the assets, freeze their accounts, and let the court sort it out. Or, I looked up. Or, he folded his hands. Or you use this as leverage. Let them walk into their engagement party believing they've won. Then you show them what truth looks like in the cold light of day. I stared at the folder, then at the drives, then at the man who had served my family for decades without ever needing recognition. I don't want revenge, I said. Good, he replied. Because this isn't revenge. This is restoration. I left the office just before noon. The sun was bright but not warm, and the city buzzed around me, unaware that something tectonic had shifted. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. Like someone who had been underwater for too long and finally reached the surface. They thought they buried me. What they didn't know was Lorraine had built a vault beneath the rubble, and inside it, she left me the match. Now it was just a matter of when to strike. The thing about poetic justice is that it doesn't knock. It doesn't wait for applause. It just slips in, silent and inevitable, like smoke under a door. Their engagement party was held at the same country club where Rachael and I had our wedding reception. The same marble floors, the same gold-trimmed doors, the same overpriced canapes. I knew they picked it on purpose, knew it was part of their performance. Look how far we've come, they wanted to say. Look what we took from him. But what they didn't know, what they never saw coming, was that every detail they so proudly paraded was about to collapse under the weight of their lies. I arrived alone, wearing a tailored black suit and a watch Lorraine had given me when I got my master's. I walked in like I was there for the free drinks, not the quiet demolition I'd orchestrated. The room buzzed with music and polished laughter. Crystals swung from the chandeliers like frozen applause, and servers floated by with trays full of champagne. I stood at the edge of the ballroom for a moment, watching them work the room. Rachael in white, of course she wore white. Laughing too loudly. Miles in a navy tux that looked custom-made, holding court like he was already royalty. Their guests clinked glasses, unaware that the ice beneath them was cracking. Earlier that day, I'd sent a letter. Actually, 2. One went to the club's management, with attached documentation showing that the funds used for the event had been drawn from accounts tied to a disputed estate. The second went to the bank, Falstaff and Rothman, accompanied by a sworn affidavit from Mr. Alden, receipts, and notarized copies of Lorraine's trust documents. Both were time-stamped. Both were set in motion hours before the first guest arrived. At precisely 8:42 p.m., during Miles' toast, a man in a gray suit entered the hall. He moved with the calm authority of someone used to delivering bad news in beautiful places. He weaved between servers and centerpieces until he reached Miles at the front. Miles had just raised his glass. To Rachael, he began, the woman who taught me that love is louder than legacy, and that the future. The man leaned in and whispered something into his ear. The champagne in Miles' glass rippled slightly. Rachael tilted her head, confused. Then another figure approached her, this time the club manager. Her diamond-drenched fingers clutched her clutch tighter as he handed her an envelope. Her face froze in that practiced smile. But I saw it. The twitch. The start of panic. Guests started to notice. A few murmurs. A few turned heads. Then came the question, sharp and unfiltered from someone near the front. Is there a problem? I stepped forward. Slowly. No rush. The sound of my shoes on marble seemed to echo louder than the music. There is, I said, voice steady. The money used for this event? It doesn't belong to the happy couple. Miles turned toward me, face paling. What the hell are you doing? Clarifying. I replied, pulling the folder from my inner jacket pocket. You see, the accounts Rachael pulled from. Those were tied to an irrevocable trust that she never had access to. And the jewelry she's wearing tonight? The rings you flashed at dinner last week? They were never transferred. Chain of custody proves they're still part of Lorraine's estate, which, according to the most recent and legally binding version of her will, belongs solely to me. The silence rippled across the room like a wave hitting glass. Someone dropped a fork. Someone else whispered my name. But I didn't take my eyes off the two of them. You forged statements, I continued. Used my grandmother's estate to fund this entire circus. And now the bank has been made aware. The venue too. This isn't just morally disgusting. It's illegal. Rachel's voice finally cracked through the quiet. David, please. Not here. No. I asked, tilting my head. Because you had no issue hosting an entire dinner where you toasted to the ashes of my past. Funny how you're choking on smoke now. Miles stepped toward me, fist clenched. This is a setup. You're trying to ruin us. No, Miles. You ruined yourselves. I just removed the curtains. I handed the folder to the club manager, who took it like it was radioactive. The event is now under review, he said stiffly. We've contacted our legal department. If what he's saying is true, this party is in violation of our financial policies. Guests were already moving, quietly, awkwardly, like rats sensing a shift in the foundation. Someone stood, someone else whispered, let's go. And within minutes, the once buzzing ballroom had emptied to half its size. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just turned and walked away, the echo of my steps trailing behind me like punctuation. At the entrance, I paused once more, glancing back at the two of them. Rachael gripping Miles' sleeve like a lifeline. Miles looking like the wind had been knocked from his chest. I left them there, in the ruins of their own celebration. The engagement that began in stolen rings and repurposed vows had gone up in smoke, right there in front of everyone. Exactly as it should have. They came the next morning. I was in the study, my study now, where the light hit the windows just the way Lorraine always liked it. I was sipping tea from one of her porcelain cups, the journal open on my lap, a red silk bookmark peeking out from the last page I'd reread a dozen times. The house was quiet, dignified, my sanctuary, until the knock. Or rather, the pounding. The front door rattled in its frame. I didn't move right away. I took another sip. Earl Grey, just the way she made it. The shouting started not long after. David, it was Miles. You coward. Open the damn door. I set the cup down gently on its saucer and stood, moving toward the front window where the lace curtains offered just enough of a view without exposing anything. And there they were, Miles and Rachael, standing on the front porch like storm clouds with teeth. Rachael looked tired. Not exhausted. Just cracked. The kind of cracks you can't cover with makeup. Her heels sank slightly into the lawn. Miles looked worse. His tie was missing, his shirt wrinkled, his face flushed from either rage or shame. You think this is over? He shouted, stepping forward and slamming his hand on the front door again. You tricked us. You set us up. I unlocked the side window slowly and pushed it open just enough to let my voice carry. No, I said. You tricked yourselves. They both froze. I stepped into the frame, one hand resting casually on the sill. You used lies to steal what wasn't yours. But what you really wanted. I gestured toward the house. You never even touched it. Rachael stepped forward, her voice strained. David, please. You don't have to do this. There's been a misunderstanding. We can fix it. We can talk like adults. I let out a small, dry laugh. Adults? You mean like adults who lie under oath? Or adults who fake financial statements and use dead women's assets to fund champagne toasts? You're blowing this out of proportion, she snapped, and the moment the words left her mouth, she realized how brittle they sounded. Proportion, I repeated softly. You stole my grandmother's estate. You walked into a courtroom and painted me as mentally unstable. You wore my ring to your engagement party to my brother. And now you're worried about proportion. Miles stepped forward again. You don't understand, David. Rachael and I, this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't personal. No? I asked. You stood in front of the family and toasted to building a future from the ashes of my past. That sounded pretty personal to me. This isn't you, Rachael said suddenly, her voice soft. You're not vindictive. You were always the calm one, the gentle one. I still am, I replied. That's why I didn't press charges. Yet. Her mouth snapped shut. Miles looked desperate now. Look, we made some mistakes, okay? But this? He gestured at the house, at the open window, at the power he no longer held. You're going too far. No, I said. I'm finally going far enough. I paused, letting the silence stretch. You know, for all your scheming, all your arrogance, you forgot the most basic rule of legacy, I said. Real power doesn't announce itself. It waits. It observes. And when the time comes, it doesn't shout. It signs. You can't just lock us out of everything. Miles yelled. The accounts, the house. I leaned forward slightly. Legally? I can. And I have. Rachael looked like she wanted to scream, but she bit her tongue. This was never about the jewelry, I continued, or the estate, or even Lorraine's name. This was about you two thinking you could rewrite the story and walk away clean. But you forgot who held the pin. They were quiet now, standing in the sun like figures made of smoke. You married each other for fortune, I said. But you forgot that legacies come with safeguards. You wanted everything Lorraine had, but you never earned her trust. And in the end, that's the only thing that matters. Miles looked at me like he didn't recognize who I was anymore. Good. That man, the one who flinched and apologized for everything, was gone. Rachael stepped back, arms crossed, her expression hollow. We'll see you in court, she said coldly. I smiled. We already did that. And you lost. I closed the window with the same quiet patience Lorraine once showed when people disappointed her. The lock clicked gently. I didn't watch them leave. I returned to the study, picked up the journal again, and found my place beneath Lorraine's underlined notes. On the next page, she'd written a single sentence. When the thieves come, let them knock, but never let them in. I picked up my tea. Still warm. Let them shout. Let them scream. Let them try to claw their way back into a house built on honesty. They weren't just shut out. They were ghosts now. And this house no longer belonged to ghosts. Falstaff and Rothman Bank sat on the corner of Mulberry and Fifth, a monument of glass and gray steel nestled between older buildings like it had forced them to make room. I arrived early, 15 minutes before the meeting, because I wanted to see their faces when they walked in. I wanted them to see that I wasn't hiding anymore. I was here, calm, and fully aware of the power they no longer held. The receptionist led me to a private conference room on the 12th floor. It smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh ink, the kind of sterile precision that banks are famous for. I chose a seat at the far end of the long glass table, where the city skyline fanned out behind me like a victory banner. Mr. Alden was already there, his glasses perched low on his nose as he reviewed a stack of files. He didn't look up when I entered, just slid a folder across the table toward me. They'll arrive soon, he said, his voice calm and clipped. We've prepared everything. Statements, audio, notarized documents, the original will, witness affidavits. I nodded. And the financials? Flagged and verified, he replied. Every withdrawal Rachael made in the 6 months following Lorraine's death was traced. Not a single one authorized by the trust. Each is a clear violation. I looked over the stack of documents in front of me, signatures, transfers, copies of emails from Rachael to banking officers, Miles' login activity during restricted hours. It was all there. Cold, hard truth, wrapped in black ink and legal weight. The door opened 15 minutes later. Rachael entered first, dressed like she was still trying to convince the world she was the victim. A sleek beige suit, her hair pulled into a bun, makeup perfect. But beneath all that, I saw the tension in her jaw, the desperation she was trying to iron out of her expression. Miles followed behind her, wearing the same navy blazer he wore to the engagement dinner, though today it hung looser on him, like the fabric itself had grown tired of the performance. Their attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Marion Locke, took the seat directly across from Alden. We didn't exchange pleasantries. The room was too cold for small talk. The bank manager entered last, a man named Ellery, silver-haired with a navy-striped tie, carrying a tablet and a legal pad. He took the seat at the head of the table and wasted no time. Thank you all for coming. We are here to address a matter of urgent concern regarding access to accounts under the Lorraine Mercer Trust. At the request of Mr. David Mercer and counsel, we have reviewed a number of transactions initiated by Mrs. Rachael Langley and Mr. Miles Mercer. I watched as both of their names hit the air like dull knives. Ellery continued. The transactions in question total nearly $1.8 million in liquid funds, with additional value tied to property holdings and heirloom assets. Rachael shifted in her seat. Those funds were accessed under legal authority, she said, her tone even. I was Lorraine's granddaughter-in-law. Miles and I were engaged, and he is blood family. The estate was awarded to us by the court. With respect, Alden cut in smoothly. The court ruled on the basis of a will that has since been invalidated by a more recent version. One Lorraine created and filed with my office 6 months prior to her death. That version placed all her assets in an irrevocable trust. Only one trustee was named, David Mercer. No co-signers. No contingencies. He opened a leather folder and slid a copy of the document across the table. Marion, their lawyer, leaned forward and scanned the first few pages. Her brow creased. This was never submitted to the original probate court. Because it was never intended for public probate, Alden replied. Lorraine anticipated manipulation. She anticipated misrepresentation. That's why this trust was designed to bypass public record. We also have statements and recordings, including a conversation between Lorraine and Rachael in which Lorraine clearly states her intention to exclude them from any inheritance. Rachel's face whitened slightly. That was private. Alden didn't blink. And now it's evidence. Ellery cleared his throat and folded his hands. The bank's position is simple. If these funds were accessed under false pretenses, and if the trust prohibits any disbursement without trustee authorization, then these actions constitute financial fraud. Miles broke the silence. We didn't know, he said, sounding like a child caught with his hand in the jar. We thought we were entitled. Entitlement and legality are not the same, Alden said. Marian leaned back, her tone shifting from defensive to damage control. What are you asking for, Mr. Mercer? I looked at them both, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt certainty. I felt the gravity of every moment I'd endured finally tipping back into balance. A full confession, I said. Signed. Admitting the unauthorized use of funds, the misrepresentation of the estate, and a formal withdrawal from any further claims to the trust or Lorraine's assets. In return, I won't press criminal charges. Rachel's voice cracked. You'd destroy us. I shook my head. No, you did that yourselves. I'm just giving you a way out that doesn't end in handcuffs. The room went quiet. Ellery stood. If no further dispute is raised, we'll prepare the documents. All affected accounts are frozen until resolution. Any attempt to access them will be flagged and reported. Alden pushed a pen forward. You can sign now. Rachael didn't look at me. She looked at the table, at the marble veins like they could carry her away from this. Miles glanced at her, then at me, then signed. His hand shook. Rachael followed, slowly, as if the paper might burn. They didn't apologize. They didn't beg. But they signed. Because they were cornered. Because truth doesn't argue. It waits. Then it wins. I didn't celebrate when the transfer cleared. I didn't throw a party or post some poetic declaration online. I didn't take revenge selfies in front of the repossessed house or gloat when their accounts were frozen. That kind of noise was never in my nature. Besides, what was there to celebrate in watching two people unravel under the weight of the very rope they braided together? Rachael and Miles returned the jewelry first. It came quietly, by courier, in a velvet box that once belonged in Lorraine's glass display cabinet. No note. No apology. Just a return to rightful ownership, done with the sterile precision of defeat. The house, grandmother's, was locked, inspected, and sealed under my name. This time with no loopholes, no backdoors, no illusions. The offshore accounts were frozen, and the assets slowly reallocated back into the trust, where they belonged. They tried, of course, to reach out. Not directly, never with anything so dignified as remorse. Instead, they used intermediaries, cousins I hadn't heard from in years, a carefully worded email from an old friend suggesting we meet for coffee, even a message from one of Rachel's former colleagues asking for a fresh start. I ignored them all. There was nothing to discuss. The conversation had ended the moment they stood in that courtroom and tried to rip the truth out from under me. It didn't take long for the rest of their world to collapse. Rachel's parents disowned her quietly, swiftly. Their names disappeared from her social media. Her mother returned a painting I had gifted them years ago, a winter scene Lorraine had loved. It arrived wrapped in brown paper, no return address. But I knew. I hung it back in the hallway, where it used to be, where it belonged. Miles didn't fare better. Once word spread through the firm that he'd forged testimony and used stolen assets to fund a personal engagement party, my father, who had tried so hard to stay neutral, had no choice. He removed Miles from the company, effective immediately. The press release cited a breach of internal ethical standards. They didn't name me. They didn't have to. Everyone who mattered already knew. Still, I didn't gloat. I didn't need to, because that wasn't what Lorraine raised me for. She had lived her life with quiet strength and deliberate grace. She taught me to see beyond moments of vengeance and understand the weight of legacy. And now, with everything they tried to steal crumbling in their hands, I had to ask myself what came next. What was I going to do with all of it? This house, this fortune, this strange, heavy peace. I found the answer on a Sunday afternoon, sitting in Lorraine's sunroom, going through one of her old notebooks. It was filled with handwritten quotes, recipes, clipped articles about local charities. In the back, folded between 2 pages, was a letter she'd written to a judge on behalf of a single mother who had lost custody of her children over a technicality. Her handwriting was still steady. She's not perfect, but she is trying. And our courts should know the difference between failure and survival. That line hit me harder than any courtroom verdict ever could. That's when the idea came to me. A way to use the pieces they hadn't broken, to build something that mattered. 2 months later, I stood in front of a modest crowd of journalists, lawyers, and a handful of former family friends I still trusted. I wore Lorraine's signet ring on my finger, not as ornament, but as symbol. Behind me hung a banner, the Lorraine Mercer Foundation for Legal Equity and Advocacy. I didn't write a speech. I spoke from the chest, from the place in me that remembered how it felt to be called unstable. To be painted as a man not worth believing. I spoke for those who had been silenced in courtrooms by the louder, better-dressed liars in their lives. There are people in this city, I said, who don't have the luxury of lawyers like Alden. People who are steamrolled in court because they lack the resources or the vocabulary to defend themselves. This foundation is for them. For the ones who've been called pathetic, delusional, unstable. For those who were right, but unheard. The first grant went to a woman named Clarice Bennett. She had lost custody of her 3-year-old son after being accused, falsely, of neglect by her ex-husband's new partner. Her case had been mishandled, her file buried. When our legal team reviewed her case, it took less than a week to uncover inconsistencies and a judge's overlooked recusal. 2 weeks later, she was reunited with her son. When she hugged me at the courthouse steps, she whispered, "No one ever fought for me before." I didn't tell her what it meant. I didn't need to. That moment was enough. The press picked up the story. For a while, my name was out there, sometimes paired with headlines about the scandal, but more often about the foundation, the work, the mission. People forgot, as they always do, how ugly things had been. Or maybe they just preferred this version of me, the one who turned betrayal into purpose. But I never forgot. I visited Lorraine's grave every Sunday, same time, same coat, rain or shine. I'd tell her about the cases, the people we were helping, the grants we were processing. And sometimes, I'd just sit there, watching the light shift through the trees, wondering what she'd say if she could see it now. I think she'd be proud. Not because I won, but because I didn't let the loss define me. Miles and Rachael moved out of the city eventually. Word was they tried to restart somewhere quieter. She teaches yoga now, according to a cousin's passing comment. Miles apparently took a sales job in a city where no one recognizes the Mercer name. Good for them, I suppose. They'll always live with what they did, but it's not my job to make them suffer. Life will handle that in ways I never could. They thought what they stole was everything. The house, the accounts, the rings, the story. But they missed the one thing that mattered most. Dignity. It's not loud. It doesn't beg for attention. It doesn't sit in court documents or sparkle on a hand. Dignity is what stays when everything else has been stripped away. It's what kept me from screaming. It's what let me walk away from the wreckage with my spine straight. It's what Lorraine saw in me from the start. They could never steal that, and I would never give it away. The house was finally quiet in the way Lorraine would have liked. No more strained laughter from guests pretending to be family. No more hollow footsteps echoing from people who didn't belong. Just stillness, and the kind of warmth that takes months to settle into a place again. I'd spent the last few weeks restoring everything that had been changed or removed. The paintings put back in their rightful rooms, the glass figurines dusted and repositioned on the shelves. Lorraine's favorite blue vase had been found tucked away in a basement storage box, its neck chipped from some careless handling. I placed it back on the corner table in the hallway and filled it with fresh lavender from the garden. There was something therapeutic about restoring order, not out of nostalgia, but as an act of quiet rebellion. Rachael and Miles had tried to scrub the soul out of this place. They'd rearranged the furniture to make it feel like their own, replaced photographs, added sterile decor that lacked history. But the bones of the house still remembered who it belonged to. I could feel it every time I walked into a room and the sunlight hit just right, just like it had when I was a boy running down these halls with skinned knees and a peanut butter sandwich in my hand. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, I decided to tackle the library. Lorraine's library had always been her sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, all organized by a system only she understood, part Dewey Decimal, part instinct. Historical fiction lived next to legal encyclopedias. Poetry danced alongside tax law manuals. And in the corner, nestled between two bay windows, sat her reading chair. A little frayed at the edges, but still holding the shape of her body like a memory woven into the cushion. I spent hours reorganizing the books, dusting the shelves, stacking journals and old newspapers for donation. And then, as I reached for her worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, something slipped out and landed softly on the carpet below. A sealed envelope. Cream-colored, thick parchment, sealed with a wax crest. I knew the emblem. It was Lorraine's. A stylized L, interwoven with a vine pattern, pressed from the antique stamp she kept in her desk drawer. I sat down slowly in her chair, holding the envelope like it might crumble if I opened it too fast. On the front, written in her unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "For David, when the storm is over." My chest tightened. I hadn't expected anything else from her. She had already given me everything, her trust, her legacy, her shield against betrayal. But this was something more. I broke the seal carefully, my fingers trembling as I pulled out the letter inside. "My dear David, if you're reading this, then you've done what I always knew you could, held steady while others broke. I didn't raise you to fight for what's yours. I raised you to know that sometimes, what's worth fighting for is your peace. You've seen what greed does. You've seen how the people we love can lose themselves chasing shadows. And still, you stood, not because it was easy, but because you refused to become what they tried to make you. That is the kind of strength the world doesn't praise enough. By now, you know the truth. About Miles. About Rachael. About the web they spun. I'm sorry you had to live through it. I'm sorry I couldn't spare you from the pain of it. But I knew, if I left you the tools, you'd build something they could never touch. Wear the ring. Own the house. But more importantly, never lose who you are. The world will try to harden you. It will tell you to strike back harder, to become cynical. Don't let it. I chose you not because you were perfect, but because you were kind. Because you had the strength to protect what mattered without losing your soul in the process. Let the past settle where it belongs. Let it become part of the story, not the ending. With love, always, Lorraine. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into my pocket like it was a compass. I sat there for a long time, letting the rain tap against the windows in soft, steady rhythm. Everything else. Courtrooms, betrayals, signatures, silence. It all faded into the quiet. That letter didn't just close a chapter. It reminded me that all of this, every painful step, had led somewhere. And I had a choice about what I'd do with what was left. I thought back to the boy I was, watching Lorraine arrange tea sets on Sunday afternoons, asking questions about the world, and never being told I was too young to understand. She believed in preparing people for storms, not sheltering them from the wind. That's what she had done with me. And now, after all the wreckage, I finally understood the full shape of the lesson. That afternoon, I opened the windows in the library, letting the rain-sweetened air flow through. I lit one of her old candles, set a jazz record on the turntable, and spent the rest of the day writing. Not for vengeance, not even for closure, but for clarity. I wrote letters to the people who had stood by me, the few who didn't flinch when the accusations came flying. I wrote thank you notes to Alden's clerks, who combed through boxes of legal documents without complaint. I wrote a recommendation for a young paralegal at the foundation who reminded me of myself at 25. Eager, unsure, quietly brilliant. And then, when the house had settled into its old rhythm, I did something I hadn't done in years. I hosted dinner. A small one. Just 10 people. Real friends. People who weren't interested in wealth or gossip or secondhand drama. The kind of people who asked, "How are you really?" and waited for an honest answer. We filled the dining room with laughter that didn't feel forced. We passed plates. We toasted to new beginnings. And when someone asked me what I was planning next, I didn't hesitate. "I think I'm done surviving," I said. "Now I want to live." They raised their glasses. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a man who had lost something. I felt like someone who had finally found what mattered. The letter stayed in my pocket all evening, a quiet reminder that not everything stolen needs to be taken back. Some things just need to be seen through.